Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is episode 30, and today we are continuing to cover the fifth and currently final movie in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, and that is Dead Men Tell No Tales / Salazar's Revenge. So, if you listened to the last episode where we started to cover this movie, we left off right after Jack Sparrow's crew left him alone. And now, Jack is completely alone, he has no one, and he's about to hit his lowest point in his life. So we're going to continue right along where we left off. So if you didn't listen to episode 29, where we started to cover this movie, I recommend you go back and listen to that one first. Or if you just want to start right here, that's perfectly fine. So let's get back into Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. So the last thing we covered in the last episode was when Jack Sparrow's crew leaves him, and then he puts the Black Pearl in a bottle on the back of the Dying Gull, and kind of imagines the Black Pearl out on the ocean again. It's a fantastic shot. It's one of my favorite shots. I love the framing of it. But anyway, after that scene, we go back to Henry Turner, who we haven't seen in a little while. And he has somehow made it back to land. He survived the destruction of the Monarch in the Devil's Triangle. And yeah, he somehow made it back to land. So we cut back to Henry here, who was in the hospital. And John Scarfield and his men are standing there waiting for Henry to wake up, I guess. But Henry wakes up, and then Scarfield says, "The whole town speaks of you, the only survivor of the Monarch. A boy who paddled all the way to St. Martin against a tide on a piece of driftwood. Found jabbering about pirates and tridents." And then we see a quick shot of one of the nurses in this hospital who looks over at Henry, and we see it's actually Carina. So Carina's going incognito currently, trying to get the scoop on this, because apparently Henry came ashore. So I don't know how far the Devil's Triangle is from St. Martin. They don't actually say that. So how he paddled all the way to St. Martin on a piece of driftwood, I don't know how long that took, but that's pretty incredible. Regardless, that's pretty incredible. But I guess Carina heard something about this guy who is crazy and talking about, the Trident of Poseidon. So since she, of course, is looking for the Trident of Poseidon, she is trying to get some more information out of Henry. But I love Henry's like, "Please, sir, let me go of these chains." Because they have him chained down to the bed. But Scarfield continues and says, "My job is to protect this island and these waters. And your sleeves have been ripped. The mark of treason." And then Henry says, "We were attacked by the dead." And Scarfield says, "And you're a coward who ran from battle. And that is how you'll die." And Scarfield leaves Henry alone. But Carina makes her way over to Henry to go and talk to him. So initially she kind of pretends she's a nurse, and Henry kind of gets annoyed, kind of pushes her away. But Carina says, "I don't believe you're a coward." And then Henry's like, "Please leave me, sister." And Carina says, "I've risked my life to come here to see if the rumors are true. You speak of the Trident?" And Henry immediately is like, "Who are you?" And Carina says, "Tell me why you seek the Trident." And then Henry just begins to lay some information on her. Says, "The Trident can break any curse at sea. My father is trapped by such a curse." And Carina's like, "You're aware that curses are not supported by science." And Henry's like, "Neither are ghosts." And then Carina's like, "So you have gone mad. I should never have come here." And then Henry's like, "Then why did you come here?" And Carina says, "Because I need to get off this island. To solve the map no man can read," and Henry finishes for her. And then he's left by Poseidon himself. And Carina's shocked by this, and she's like, "You've read the ancient text?" And Henry's like, in every language they were written. So apparently they're written in apparently this legend is very widespread. But Henry's like, but this map has never been seen or read by any man. And Carina just says, luckily I'm a woman. And then from her pocket, Carina pulls out the Diary of Galileo Galilei, which is a very important piece in this movie. This is really, really cool book. The really beautiful cover, the big giant like red ruby or diamond, whatever it is, pushed into the cover. Really, really cool looking piece, and it's a very important thing in this movie. So Carina begins explaining to Henry, Galileo, he spent his life searching for the trident. It's why he invented the spyglass, why astronomers have spent their lives staring into the sky. So, and then Henry's like, so you're saying the map no man can read is hidden in the stars? And Carina says, it was left to me by my father. He believed I could find what no man has ever found, and I will not let him down. Soon there will be a blood moon. Only then can the map be read and the trident found. So, we of course got this, in the span of like a few minutes, we got this whole like info dump on the trident and Galileo and also Carina's past. There's a lot of stuff that kind of like to digest in this short conversation between Carina and Henry. But so Carina has had this diary pretty much all of her life. So she was left with this diary by her father, and we don't know who her father is, or she doesn't even know who her father is. And then the audience, of course, we don't know until later in the movie. Of course, if you've seen the movie, you know, but I'm not going to spoil it yet because I'm going to kind of... but of course, we get this whole info dump on the trident. There's a blood moon coming, and apparently the blood moon has the power to kind of show, where the trident is hidden. Which is a very interesting kind of... I think it's kind of neat, but it's weird how it's tied to the blood moon, and there's really nothing saying that it's tied to the blood moon, so how does Carina know that the blood moon's gonna reveal the map? Like, or maybe it is actually mentioned in the book or in the diary that it's tied to a blood. I don't know. We don't. She just like kind of just mentions it, and it's like, okay, apparently the blood moon reveals the map. So I guess he has to take Carina's word for it. But Henry asks her, he's like, who are you? And luckily, Scarfield answers his question, and Scarfield and his soldiers come back into the hospital, and it's like, Carina Smith. And Carina says, if you wish to save your father, you'll have to save mine. And she pulls out this long pin, gives it to him so he can free himself. But Carina says, find us a ship, and the trident will be ours. And she begins to run away, and I love how Scarfield and his men chase him. He's like, turn to me, witch! She runs through the hospital. She pushes all these patients and people down. And she gets stopped. She was going to run out the other side, but she's stopped by some other officers who come and pin her to the wall and put her in chains. But as Scarfield's running toward Carina, one of his soldiers yells out, he's gone! And Scarfield turns around, and we find out that Henry has escaped. And Scarfield says, find that coward. He'll hang with the witch. Then after that scene, we go back over to a very drunken Jack Sparrow. So we've now... Jack is now at his lowest point, and I talked about this a little bit on the last episode. I feel like this movie has a really cool arc for Jack Sparrow, but it doesn't execute that arc as good as it could have. If this movie was better, I feel like that this arc of Jack reaching his lowest point and then slowly over the course of the movie becoming more like himself, more like the Jack Sparrow we used to know, I think it's a cool arc for him, but it just doesn't work as well as it could have. If you watch the movie just like a normal person, you're not really paying attention, you don't really notice that Jack has this arc because he kind of just acts the same throughout the entire movie. Even closer to the end of the movie, he still kind of acts like a drunken like comedic sidekick almost in some cases, which I don't know if Disney just wanted Jack Sparrow to be that character, which is kind of annoying if that is true, because Jack Sparrow is so much more than a comedic relief character. Like, did you not learn anything? Did you not watch your own movies? Yeah. But anyway, let's get back to the scene here. We'll talk a bit more about Jack as we see what he does in a little bit. But it's currently raining in St. Martin, and Jack's just walking through the streets, and he is completely drunk, and he's like, "Think Captain Jack's washed up, eh? I haven't had a washing in years." I think it's so, I find that line so funny. But he's walking along, and then we see there's a bunch of soldiers who are running about St. Martin, trying to find Henry. And then we see Jack, he climbs up this fence, and he stands on top of it, trying to balance himself out, but he eventually loses his balance, and he begins to topple forward, and he's just like, bugger, and he falls down into the mud, face first. And now he's covered in mud as he begins to wobble over to the nearby tavern. And then we go inside the tavern, and Jack sees a whole bunch of wanted posters on the wall, and he sees one for himself. So it says Jack Sparrow, the Notorious Pirate. And it says a bounty of... The original bounty is £100, but then you can see it's crossed out and it says 50, then 50's crossed out, 25, 25's crossed out, 10's crossed out, and then you can see there's just a £1 at the bottom. Which I guess also really signifies how Jack has fallen from grace. But like, I don't really understand, because he's still a pirate. Like, why are they decreasing the bounty? It doesn't really make sense to me. I guess it's just kind of like it's one of the comedic gags. Like, haha, Jack Sparrow's bounty is like decreased to £1. That's funny, but I don't know, it just feels weird. It doesn't like work. Like, I don't know why they would decrease the bounty for a pirate. You know, he's still a pirate. It's not like he's not a pirate anymore. I guess he's just because he's not as notorious as he used to be. So maybe that's why, you know, they don't think he's that hard to catch. But then again, he hasn't been caught, so who knows? But anyway, we see this wanted poster. It kind of opens Jack's eyes a bit, and he kind of, since he is drunk right now, he's not in the best mood. Of course, he just lost his crew. He has no ship currently. You know, if you count the Dying Gull, but like, that's not really a ship. But Jack goes over to the bartender, and Jack just says, "May I please have a drink, please?" And the bartender is just like, show me a silver." And Jack's like, "Silver?" And then we realize, of course, Jack has no money, but this is where we get one of the most out-of-character moments for Jack Sparrow in the whole franchise. Maybe the most out-of-character moment for Jack Sparrow. But he looks down at his compass, and he stares at it for a second, and he says, "How about a trade?" And then he just says, "Give me the bottle," and he slams the compass down on the table in front of him, giving up the compass for some rum. And I don't know, man, this is one of the most, it has to be the most out of character moment for Jack Sparrow in this entire franchise. I don't believe for a second that Jack Sparrow would ever actually give up the compass in a way like this. Of course, you know, throughout the franchise, we've seen Jack give his compass to other people, you know, but he always ends up getting it back. It's not like he's giving it away, like he's literally trading it for rum. Like, obviously he's at his lowest point here, but still at Jack's lowest point, he would never give away something so, like, his prized possession, like the compass. I don't know why he would do that. I don't think he would ever do that. So obviously they needed something to used to have Salazar be freed, which also brings up the other big plot hole in this movie, which, I mean, the whole Jack's compass as a whole in this movie is a plot hole, because of course he gives it away here, and when he gives it away, everything starts to shake, everything begins to rumble in this tavern, and then we go back to the Devil's Triangle, where Salazar is just biding his time on the Silent Mary with the rest of his crew. But then Salazar begins to notice that the rocks in the Devil's Triangle are starting to fall apart and break, and the sunlight begins to shine out from behind the broken rocks. We go back to Jack in the tavern, and the bartender grabs the compass and throws it in his kind of tray or whatever, and then Jack grabs the bottle of rum, and the shaking stops. Then we do have a cool kind of transition of the compass spinning its dial, and then it transitions over to the Silent Mary's helm that is turning as well, which I think is kind of cool. It's a nice transitional shot, but Salazar, he realizes, he says, Jack Sparrow has given away the compass. And this is, let's talk about this for a second. This is, I think, the biggest thing. Obviously, Jack Sparrow giving away the compass is the key to Salazar's escape. And so if the compass was the key to Salazar escaping, and all Jack had to do was give it away, why wasn't Salazar freed the last 15 times Jack gave away the compass, first of all? Well, obviously, Salazar didn't exist back then, but still, you would have thought that the people writing this movie, or making this movie, would have understood that Jack has given away the compass so many times, so why would it not have worked in any of those moments? But so the Devil's Triangle collapses, Salazar is able to escape back to the ocean. So I guess the Devil's Triangle is completely gone, because it all just crumbles into the ocean, and it's gone. So apparently it no longer exists, because the compass, it's also not explained, because did the compass come from the Devil's Triangle? Why is it tied to the Devil's Triangle? Never mind. That's enough. Enough about the compass. Enough about the Devil's Triangle. Let's just keep going with the movie. So Salazar's crew begins to cheer because they are now free from the triangle. Of course, they're still cursed, but they are no longer tied to the triangle, and that they can now roam the ocean freely. And then Salazar just says, now, it is time to hunt a pirate. And then we go back to Jack in the tavern, who kind of toasts with the rum bottle. And he just says, pirate's life. And then he walks out of the tavern with his rum bottle, freshly acquired from the trade. And then we see Henry, who of course escaped earlier. Henry observes Jack from a little ways away. And Jack, he opens the rum bottle and he begins to get ready to drink it. And he says, come to daddy. And as he raises the bottle up, one of the soldiers shoots the bottle. And then we see Mayor Dix and a bunch of guards. They come up, and Mayor Dix is like, just the man we've been looking for. And Jack's like, why? Why am I looked for? And Mayor Dix is like, let it be known that the pirate Jack Sparrow will be executed at dawn. And Jack's like, executed? I will never set foot in this town again, sir. You mark my words. And they begin to kind of haul them off to prison. And of course Henry sees all this as Jack is brought away to jail by the mayor and the soldiers. And after that scene, we go over to this pirate ship that has this red Jolly Roger flag on the back of it. So we'll come to find out in a little bit, but this is actually one of Barbossa's pirate ships, because of course we learned earlier that Barbossa is pretty much the the best pirate in the ocean, which honestly good for him, because if there was any pirate that was going to be the best pirate of all time, it would be Barbossa. But Barbossa now has a fleet of his own ships. I believe Pike earlier in the movie, he says 10 ships, I believe. So this is one of Barbossa's ships in his fleet. And we go over and we see one of the deckhands. He goes to get a drink of water. And right after he drinks it, he looks over at the starboard side of the ship, and he sees this dead, like, seagull, I guess was trapped in the Devil's Triangle along with Salazar and the Silent Mary. And the deckhand, he kind of washes his face with some water, and the seagull disappears. But then on the horizon, he sees the Silent Mary off in the distance. And it's really cool how the Silent Mary has this big kind of like cloud that kind of like travels on top of it, which I think is also a kind of neat detail as well. But he sees this, and as the Silent Mary gets closer, it begins to it like rears itself up. So like the whole bow of the ship begins to raise out of the water, and the hull begins to open up like a rib cage, and it kind of opens up like jaws, like teeth. It's really, really crazy. But then the seagull comes back, scares the pirate, and then we get this shot of the Silent Mary pretty much eating this pirate ship, as the bow kind of like crushes back down onto the ship and kind of splits it in half. I think it's a really, really cool like idea. It's really, really cool, but it's never explained as to why Salazar's ship has this power to just magically eat ships, pretty much. I'll call it the ship eating pose, but like once again, it's never Salazar's curse is never explained. How we'll find out more about the curse in a little bit, but I think it's a cool thing, but it just comes out of nowhere. Like, why does this ship have the power to do that? I don't know. But anyway, we go back to Carina, who, of course, is back in jail because she was re-arrested. We see that she is scribing some stuff on this prison wall. And then she looks up as she gets a glow from on top of her cell, and we realize the blood moon is now coming out. So the clouds are moving away, and the blood moon is coming into view. And Carina, she looks down at the diary in her hands, and she sees that the ruby is glowing. So she then finds out that she can actually pull the ruby out, or maybe, I mean, her reaction of pulling it out makes it seem like she couldn't do that before. So I'm guessing she just never tried. But she pulls out the ruby from the cover. And then she uses the ruby and the light from the blood moon above to shine a hidden message on the cover of the diary. So this hidden message that is on the cover of Galileo's diary says, "To release the power of the sea, all must divide." And then she looks down she follows down with the constellation, and at the very bottom, right under the last star of the constellation, the light from the blood moon through the ruby shows an island. So Carina's like, it's an island. The stars lead to an island. So we get, of course, this big revelation about, now we know the stars are pointing to the island that the trident is located on. So now we have all of our information. So then we go back over to the jail again. I think this is a different jail than the one Carina's in. Maybe they're in the same jail, but just in different areas of the jail. But we see some soldiers who are just chilling. I'm guessing they're on their break eating. But Henry, he steals a soldier outfit as he begins to kind of make his way down into the cells to look for Jack Sparrow, of course. So he asks the one pirate, he's like, "I'm looking for a pirate, Jack Sparrow." And the pirate's like, "Bugger off." But Henry continues to look for Jack, and he comes up to this cell, and he's like, please, I need to speak with you. And you can see in the back of the cell, we have Jack Sparrow. So, of course, Jack Sparrow's coat, his hat, they're all just right there. So he must be standing there. But he doesn't turn around, so Henry turns around to look if there's anyone coming. And out of nowhere, Jack springs up, and he grabs Henry, holds him by his neck, and Jack's like, hand me your sword. And Henry's like, I don't have a sword. And Jack's like, what kind of soldier has no weapon? And Henry's like, I'm currently wanted for treason. And Jack's like, oh, so not the very good kind then. And Henry's like, I'm looking for a pirate, Captain Jack Sparrow. And then Jack releases him, and he's like, well, today is your lucky day, because I just happen to be Captain Jack Sparrow. Henry looks at Jack, like, flabbergasted for like 5 seconds, and he's like, no, it can't be. I've spent years searching for this. The great Jack Sparrow is not some drunk in a cell. And I love how Henry's like, do you have a ship? A crew? Pants? And of course, see, Jack's pants are not on because his pants are on the mannequin. And I love how Jack just responds, a great pirate does not require such intricacies. And I love how Henry's like, do you know how long I've been waiting for this moment? The risks I've taken to be here. And he gets closer to the bars. He's like, are you sure you're the Jack Sparrow? And Jack's like, real question is, who are you? And then Henry's like, my name is Henry Turner, son of Will Turner and Elizabeth Swan. And Jack's like, ugh, you're the evil spawn of them too. And then I love how Jack's like, does mommy ever ask about me? And then, like, smiles at Henry, and then Henry's like, no. And then Jack's like, oh, go on. She called my name in her sleep. And then Henry says, she never spoke of you. Which is weird, because earlier in the movie, you know, when Henry is talking to Will on the Dutchman, you know, Henry's like, you know, like the tales of you and Captain Jack Sparrow. How did he find these out if Elizabeth never told him? Maybe Henry's just lying right now, but like, once again, that makes no sense, because how did he know about Jack and Will and their adventures together if he didn't find that out from his mom? But, like, I don't know. I feel like at some point Elizabeth would have told Henry about Jack. Like, there's no way that, you know, the guy that saved his father's life just would never be mentioned, you know, to their son. So I have no idea. Apparently Elizabeth never told Henry about Jack, but that makes no sense because Henry knows about, you know, the tales of Will and Jack together. So once again, it's one of those moments in this movie that, like, I have no idea, like, if I just don't understand. But Jack continues, and he's like, are you sure we're talking about the same people? He's a cursed eunuch. She's golden-haired, stubborn, pouty lips, neck like a giraffe, and 2 of those wonderful... And then Henry stops and be like, yes, it's her. And he's like, I need you to listen, Jack, because at the moment you're all I've got. I found a way to save my father. There is one thing that can break his curse and free him from the Dutchman. The trident of Poseidon. And then Jack's like, the treasure to be found with the map that no man can read. Never heard of it. And then Henry's like, there is a girl inside this prison, Jack, who holds that map. The moon has turned to blood. The trident will be found, and you could be one who holds the sea and with it become all that you once were. The great... And then Henry stops as he realizes Jack fell asleep. And then Henry's like, Jack! And Jack wakes up. He's like, I'm so sorry. Were you still talking? I believe I nodded off a bit. And Henry's like, one more thing. A message from someone you know, named Captain Salazar. And then Jack kind of pauses for a second. He's like, I once knew a Spaniard named something in Spanish. And Henry continues like, El Matador del Mar, the butcher of the sea. And Jack's like, him? No. Quite happily, he's dead. Very, very dead. Ship went down. And Henry's like, inside the triangle. And he's like, he's coming for you, Jack, to seek revenge as a dead man's tale is told. And Jack's like, I don't believe you. And then he's like standing over by that mannequin. And then like, he pauses for a second, and then he runs back over to Henry. He's like, what did he say? I love that moment. But Henry's like, he said that your compass was the key to his escape. And then I love how Jack just like, oh. But Henry's like, an army of dead are coming straight for you, Jack. The Trident of Poseidon is your only hope. Do we have an accord? So then we go over to the next scene, which is on the Queen Anne's Revenge. So we finally get to see the Queen Anne's Revenge again, which is very cool. And we can see that the Queen Anne's Revenge is very different than the last time we saw it. So pretty much everything on the Queen Anne's Revenge is coated in gold. There's treasure all over the ship. As we can tell, Barbossa has become pretty much the richest pirate in the sea. We see just a bunch of pirates just fighting each other on deck. And then we get to see the return of Murtagh and Mulroy. Of course, they are now pirates. If you remember, the last time we saw Murtagh and Mulroy was at the end of At World's End, where they, they hitched a ride on the Black Pearl and became pirates. They ditched their East India Trading Company outfits and became pirates at the end of At World's End. And they also were with Barbossa on the Pearl at the end of the movie. So also this begs the question, how did they survive the attack on the Black Pearl by Blackbeard? Did they also maybe like leave the Pearl like along with Marty, during that time and just survived? Who knows? But it's so great to see Murtagh and Mulroy back, and of course it is Angus Barnett and Giles New back reprising their roles. I think it's incredible they're back in this movie. I guess they kind of take the place of Pintel and Ragetti in this film. Of course, though, I still do miss Pintel and Ragetti. Like, you can't replace Pintel and Ragetti. As good as Murtagh and Mulroy are, I enjoy Pintel and Ragetti more. But I love Murtagh and Mulroy, and I'm so happy they're back in this movie. I think they look great because now they're actually like full-on pirates. Like, they've been pirates for years now. So it's really, really cool. And, if you're just a normal person watching this, you wouldn't even notice that they are Murtagh and Mulroy, because at this point they look so different because they have facial hair at this point too. Mulroy has a beard. Oh, Murtagh has facial hair too. But anyway, let's see what Murtagh and Mulroy are up to these days. So Mulroy's like, well, I'm not going to be the one to tell him. And Murtagh's like, it was your idea. And Mulroy's like, no, it was my idea for you to tell him. And Murtagh's like, he likes you more than me. And Mulroy's like, he doesn't like anybody. And they both walk into the captain's cabin of the Queen Anne's Revenge. And finally we get the reveal of Hector Barbossa. So we see that he is living a very rich life as a pirate these days. He's got this wig, kind of like the wig he had on Stranger Tides, but this time it's like a way more expensive wig. His clothes are very expensive. His peg leg is completely bedazzled in gold, like a completely golden peg leg. He's living the life. He's definitely living the life, and good for him. He's got some musicians playing for him in the captain's cabin as he's just chilling and relaxing. And I love how Murtagh and Mulroy just burst in. And then I love how Mulroy's like, we know you said never to disturb you. And Murtagh's like, or to come in without good cause. And Mulroy's like, or to speak without first, asking ourselves whether our thoughts were absolutely necessary. And then Murtagh's like the time the ship was on fire. And then, like, that being an example of necessary thought. And then Mulroy's like, sir, again, we do apologize for starting that fire. And then Barbossa stands up, he grabs his blunderbuss off the table, and he shoots the wall above the musicians, and they all three of them run out of the captain's cabin, and Barbossa just yells, "Speak!" But I love that I love that moment with Murtaugh and Mulroy. It's hilarious. And Murtaugh's like, "It's your ships, sir." And Mulroy says, "They're being attacked by an enemy that takes no riches." And Murtaugh's like, "Kills without provocation." And Barbossa's like, "My ships, not possible." And Mulroy's like, "3 have already been sunk, sir. They've been sunk by a captain called Salamander." And I love how Murtaugh's like, "Samovar." But of course, they both mess up the name, but Barbossa understands who they're talking about. And Barbossa just says, "Salazar." And Mulroy's like, "That's it, your Cernus." He leaves 1 man from each vessel to tell the tale. The entire fleet is being sunk and will soon be dead. And then Murtaugh's like, "And quite possibly out of business." So after this scene, we then see Barbossa on land. I believe this is on the Isle of St. Martin. So apparently everything takes place on St. Martin in this movie, which I just think is funny. It's very funny how everything takes place on one island in the Caribbean in this movie. But Barbossa, he makes his way on St. Martin down this alley, and he comes up to this door that's being guarded by a soldier, and he says, "I'll be needing some time with your witch." Barbossa, he puts a bag of coins in this soldier's hand, and the soldier unlocks the door and lets Barbossa in. And we are now coming into contact with a new character that debuted in this movie, and that character is Shansa. So let's quickly talk about Shansa real quick, because I have some thoughts about Shansa. So Shansa, to me, I call Shansa the most useless character in the entire franchise of this. I don't understand why they made another sea witch character. I guess they wanted someone to fill the void that Tiadama left, but like Shansa, and this is not disrespecting the actress at all. I think the actress who plays Shansa does a fantastic job, but Shansa like doesn't do almost anything in this movie. You know, she has this one scene with Barbossa here, and then she has one other scene with Scarfield a little later on, but that is it. And she just gives some quick plot details, but like she is the most. I'll just say she is the most useless character in this whole franchise. Because like, what was the point of bringing in another sea witch character? Like, did we really have to do that? Yeah, I don't know. I think she's a cool character. It would be cool if she was more fleshed out. But because she only has like 2 scenes in this movie, it just feels like that she just doesn't really exist. Like she's just there and then she's gone. She's just gone for the rest of the movie. But also, I guess, you know, the Navy just has Shansa imprisoned, which is also weird. But Shansa says, "I've been expecting you, Captain. Perhaps you'd like some tea." And it's this very, like, disgusting green goop. It's very disgusting. And I love how Barbossa's like, "I shall pass, thank ye kindly." And then Shansa says, "The price of crossing my door is blood, Captain." And Barbossa's like, "That explains why you're not so busy." And Shansa says, "Everyone pays eventually." And Barbossa says, "Shansa, you and I made a bond long ago. I saved you from the gallows, remember?" And Shansa says, "And I cursed your enemies. Now you come to me in fear, as the dead have taken command of the sea." So let's briefly talk about this quick passing, like, plot exposition here. So Shansa was saved from the gallows by Barbossa, and Shansa repaid him by cursing his enemies. So I'm guessing that's how Barbossa has taken command of the sea and become like you know, the most notorious pirate is, he just had no competition really, and that was because of Shansa cursing other people. But also, if Barbossa saved Shansa from the gallows, then why is Shansa still currently kind of imprisoned by the Navy on St. Martin? Like, that makes no sense. I don't understand that part of it. Anyway, let's keep going on. But Barbossa's like, and what would the dead be wanting with me? And Shansa's like, not you, Captain. They're searching for a sparrow. And Barbossa's like, Jack? And Shansa grabs this rat off her shoulder, which I guess was just sitting there the whole time. And she's like, Jack will sail for the Trident with a girl and a pearl. Of course, referring to Carina and, of course, the Black Pearl, which is in a bottle. But Barbossa's like, the Trident can never be found. And she throws the rat into the big cauldron. And she's like, the Trident is Jack's only hope. And then inside this cauldron, we get this image of the Silent Mary destroying Barbossa's fleet. She's like, the dead are conquering the sea, unable to step on dry land. And then she turns to Barbossa and she's like, perhaps you should retire to the countryside. And I love this moment. This Barbossa just says, you mean grass? On a farm? Milking a cow? Making cheese? This is so funny. And then he's like, while they sink me treasure. And Shansa's like, ask yourself this, Captain. Is this a treasure worth dying for? And then Barbossa's like, I'm a pirate. Always will be. So how do I save what be mine? And Shansa says, Jack held a compass, which points you to the thing you desire most. But betray the compass, and it releases your greatest fear. And Barbossa's like, a pirate's greatest fear be Salazar, is it? And then out of nowhere, Shansa pulls out Jack's compass from literally nowhere. Where does it come from? How does she get it? It literally just comes out of nowhere. Barbossa is equally as stunned. He's like, how did you get this? And then Shansa says, I have my ways. Lead them to Jack before he finds the trident, and all your treasure will come back to you. And Barbossa takes the compass from Shansa and he says, time to make a deal with the dead. But like, how did Shansa get the compass? I feel like the past this conversation we just had is literally all just for plot convenience. Like, how does she have the power to get the this just reinforces my statement that Shansa is just the most useless character, because she's not even a character. She just is a plot device. Which is so weird. Like, she does nothing important on her own. She just serves as a way to, forward the plot. Like, she just gets the compass out of nowhere, gives it to Barbossa, like, gives Barbossa all this information that he needs. I don't know. It would be cool if Shansa was fleshed out more as a character. And maybe Shansa is kind of like a leftover piece of the original Dead Men Tell No Tales script draft by Terry Rossio, which we will talk about, of course, later on in the podcast. But in that script, they had a female villain who was like a witch kind of a villain. And I think the reason, and it's weird, they said the reason they didn't want to go with the female villain was because, Johnny Depp did this movie called Dark Shadows. If you've ever seen that movie, it's like he's like a vampire or something. But the villain in that movie is a female, and they didn't want to have another Johnny Depp movie with a female villain. I don't know why that. Apparently, that's the official reason. and it makes no sense to me. I think it would have been so cool to have a female pirates villain, like a full-on female pirates villain. Of course, Angelica, she was kind of a villain, but not really. So it would have been cool to have an actual female pirates villain. Hopefully, at some point we do get a female pirates villain. That would be so cool. But of course, we'll talk about that script later on. But maybe Shansa was just that character retooled into being this character. But I mean, why? What's the point of having her if she's just gonna do nothing and just be a whole reason to drive the plot forward? I don't know. It would have been cool for Shansa to be more developed, because I feel like she gets done dirty in this movie because she does nothing but just pushes the plot forward. Like, I don't know. Anyway, let's push past this scene. Let's go back to the prison where Jack is now being dragged off to be executed. And the soldiers are pulling him through the cell block here. And we hear this pirate singing in one of these cells. And Jack's like, well, who is singing? He's like confused. And he's like, hold on, stop. And they stop right in front of this cell. And Jack's like, Dad? And then inside the cell, we see this pirate playing a game of cards. And he's singing, and he turns around and looks at Jack. And we get the reveal of Paul McCartney in this movie. And Jack's like, Uncle Jack. And then Uncle Jack says, Jackie boy, how's it going? But I cannot believe they got Paul McCartney in this movie. So of course, Keith Richards played Captain Teague, who is, Jack Sparrow's dad. So I guess apparently everyone in Jack Sparrow's family is a rock star, because if Keith Richards is Jack's father, then Paul McCartney is his uncle, who is also conveniently named Jack. But I think it's incredible how Paul McCartney is in this movie. I think it's so funny. My grandmom loves the Beatles, so she loves that Paul McCartney's in this movie. But I think it's so cool how they have different rock star people playing Jack's family. I think it's fantastic. If they ever expand on Jack's family, they need to just have more rock stars, just more people. But anyway, Uncle Jack, he's like, how's it going? And Jack's like, can't complain really. You? And I love how Uncle Jack's like, I've been waiting all morning in here for a beating, but the service is terrible. And I love how Jack's like, shameful. And then Uncle Jack, he goes over closer to the bars. And he's like, the oceans have turned to blood. It's best stay on dry land where it's safe. And I love how Jack's like, I'm about to be executed on dry land. And Uncle Jack's like, good point. And then he's like, did I ever tell you the one about the skeleton? And then Jack's like, yes, you have, many times, in fact. And Uncle Jack's like, a skeleton walks into the bar, orders a beer and a mop. And then, no one laughs, but, far off in the prison, there's this one guy just laughing all the way down there. And then Jack just smiles at Uncle Jack. He's like, funny as ever. And then the soldier's like, come on, let's go. And they pull Jack away. And I love how Uncle Jack's like, oh, and if they disembowel you, ask for Victor. He's got the softest hands. And Jack's like, thank you. And Uncle Jack's like, I mentioned my name. They won't cut your feet off. I love that cameo appearance by Paul McCartney. It's fantastic. But anyway, we go over to the town square, I'm guessing, in St. Martin, where everyone's assembled for a pirate execution. So we see these carts being pulled in. One of them has Jack in it, and the other one has Carina in it. So, of course, we now have a double execution. And the soldier pulls Carina out. She's like, come on, you're up first. Then they go over to the other cart, and they pull Jack out. And the one officer is like, and how would you like to die, pirate? Hanging, firing squad, or a new invention, the guillotine? And Jack's like, guillotine? Sounds French. I love the French. Did they know they invented mayonnaise? How bad could it be? It's French, eh? And they spin him around, then he takes a look at the guillotine. He sees the blade. He's like, oh, well, I've changed my mind. But quickly, let's talk about the mayonnaise reference. Of course, if you've seen the one of the Curse of the Black Pearl deleted scenes, when Jack's on Ile de Muerta and he gets cornered by Barbossa's crew, and he's trying to think of the word parlay, and he's like, parlay, he's like Latin based, of course, and then he says the thing about how it's French, and by the French inventors of mayonnaise, which I think it's very funny how they brought that back up here. So a nice connection to one of those Curse of the Black Pearl deleted scenes. So very, very, very cool connection there. But Jack is carted. He's pushed through the town as all the townspeople are yelling and sneering at him. But as he's being pushed through the town, Jack's like yelling at the soldiers behind him. He's like, "No, please have mercy on me. I'm a bedwetter." And I love we see this shot of Mayor Dix along with his wife up in the stands. But then we see the soldiers pushing Carina through the town as well, up to the noose that is waiting for her. And then we see Henry, who is waiting in the bell tower up above both of them. And then Jack's like, "Oh, come on now, I have to walk upstairs for these as well." And I love how one of the soldiers is like, "Bring the basket." And then Jack's like, "Basket? Why?" And then they strap him down to the board. And while he's getting strapped down, they bring Carina up and they tie the noose around her neck. And Jack's like, here's an idea. How about a good old-fashioned stoning, eh? And I love, Jack's like, I'd kill to be stoned right now. Gets the crowd involved. But of course, if you don't know what a stoning is, in this context, I think it means two things. But of course, the actual stoning was an actual way that they would actually kill people back in the day. They would literally just throw stones at someone until they died. Which is a very brutal way of killing someone. So yeah, that's what a stoning is if you didn't know. But also I think it's like a dual reference for Jack wanting to be actually stoned. Which I think it's funny how it has the dual meaning, but I love how they begin to push Jack down. But he's like, I should like to speak to Victor in disembowelment. And then he looks down at the basket and he sees two heads in the basket of like two people who were executed before him. And he's like, I'm not one to complain normally, but this basket's full of heads. And we see another quick glance of Mayor Dix and his wife Frances, as Jack and Carina are being readied to be executed. Then we go over to Carina, and she's like, the final words of Carina Smith. And then everyone's jeering and yelling out, but Carina just yells, "Quiet!" And they all actually quiet down. And she's like surprised that it actually worked. And she's like, the final words of Carina Smith. And then I love how we go over to Jack, and Jack's like, oh. And then Carina's like, good sirs, I am not a witch, but I forgive your common dim-wittedness and feeble brains. In short, most of you had the mind of a goat. And Jack's like, pardon me, sir, but is it not common practice for those about to be executed to be granted at last, I don't know, something or other? And then Carina's like, I believe I was making a point, if you could just be patient. And then Jack's like, no, my head's about to be lopped off, hence the urgency. And Carina's like, my neck is to be broken. And then I love how Jack's like, did you know that on occasion the neck doesn't actually break? It just hurts? And Carina's like, what? And Jack's like, oh yes, I've seen men swing for hours. Eyes bulging, tongues swelling, revolting, gurgling sound. And Carina's like, may I finish? And Jack's like, no, you're lucky. I wish I was hung. And then Carina's like, kill the filthy pirate, I'll wait. And Jack's like, which is first? And Carina's like, I am not a witch, were you not listening? And I love how that... And Jack's like, quite hard to listen when you have the mind of a goat. But as they're arguing, Henry jumps out of the bell tower and he swings down on this rope. And then I love how Scarfield stands up. He's like, enough of them, kill them both. And everyone like cheers, like, yeah. But they're about to execute Jack and Carina, but then Henry comes swinging down and distracts everyone as he swings into the crowd and begins taking down some soldiers. I love how Carina and Jack are both like, what is he doing? But he easily gets captured. And Scarfield, he's like, get another noose. Did you think you could defeat us, boy? And Henry's like, no, sir. I'm just a diversion. And then he yells out, fire! And then we see Gibbs, Marty, Scrum, Pike, Bollard, and Kremble are all still here. And Gibbs fires off a cannon, and the cannonball shoots right over to where Jack is about to be executed. And the executioner holding the rope of the blade of the guillotine, he runs away and lets go, and the blade begins to come down toward Jack. But the cannonball hits the beam under the platform, and the whole platform begins to fall apart. And right before Jack gets his head lopped off, he then begins to swing around as the guillotine just swings around the platform. It's a very like comedic moment, but I think it's just like there's really no need for this, of the blade just coming close to his head and then going back again. It just goes on for far too long. But Henry, of course, he frees himself and he runs over to go and save Carina. But Gibbs gives the order to reload the cannon. Then we see Scrum is going up to save Carina as Pike and Bollard are reloading the cannon. They shoot it off again and they shoot down the platform. I love how the one guy just goes flying. Like, he just goes flying through the air. But Scrum, he makes his way up to where Carina is, and I love he runs over and like kicks the executioner, but he just falls down. And then I love how Carina ends up kicking the executioner off, and I love how Scrum's like, thank you. But then Scrum, he begins to fight this other soldier up there. But Pike, Bollard, Kremble, Marty, and the rest of the crew, they begin fighting off these soldiers. I love how one of the officers, he grabs Kremble and he's like, come here, you pirate scum. And then Bollard comes up from behind him and knocks the guy out. But then we go back to Scrum, who's fighting this officer, and he almost like touches like the release lever for the trapdoor Carina's standing over. But he continues fighting this, but then the guy, he puts his sword on the thing, and then they have the sword stuck on the lever. So like Carina's like, what are you doing? No. And they're like slowly not moving, and Carina's like, careful. And then Scrum, he successfully knocks the guy off the lever and punches him down. But I just don't understand why Carina couldn't just move over a little bit. Like, there should be enough slack for her to move over off the trapdoor. But we see Jack is still like stuck in the guillotine, dangling upside down. And he sees there's this horse-drawn cart that is going straight toward him, and the horse cart smacks the guillotine thing back, and it begins to swirl again in the air. And he finally gets free, but he's still stuck, like strapped down to that board. But he stops right as the guillotine blade falls right in front of him. But Henry, he trips over these two guards, and he begins to run over to Carina. And I love how Carina, she thanks Scrum, and Scrum's like, you're welcome, milady. And as he kind of like bows down, he hits the lever, and Carina falls right down. But thankfully, Henry is right there and saves her. And then we go back over to Jack, who is saved by Gibbs. He knocks out this soldier who's coming straight for Jack. I love how Jack's like, I knew you'd come crawling back, traitor. And Gibbs is like, the Turner boy gave us 10 silver pieces to save your neck. And I love how Jack is kind of using that board to kind of like, to actually like fight, because the one guy sticks his sword into it. And we go back to Henry and Carina, and Henry's like, from this moment on, we're to be allies. And then Carina's like, considering where your left hand is, I'd say we're more than that. And Henry's like, well, we find the trident together. Do I have your word? And Carina's like, you're holding everything but my word. And then we go back over to Jack and Gibbs. And I love how the one soldier's trying to pull the sword out of the board that Jack's stuck to. And I love how, and Jack's like, then I bestow upon you the honor of you saving me for a small donation. And then Gibbs is like, you expect us to pay you to save you? And I love how Jack, he uses the sword stuck in the board to knock out that one guy. And he's like, yes. For a mere 10 pieces. Now then Jack falls over this coffin, and he knocks over the one guy who is fighting him. Thankfully, Jack is now not stuck to the board anymore. But Gibbs is like, madness! We won't pay more than 5. And then Jack's like, well then, 8 it is. Then we go back to Henry and Carina, and Henry's like, perhaps we could discuss this later as I'm having trouble hoisting your port. And Carina's like, you are far from port, that is my stern. And Henry's like, are you sure? And Carina's like, positive. And then out of nowhere, Scarfield emerges in front of them, and he's like, well, look at this. If I kill the coward, the witch hangs. 2 for the price of 1. And Carina's like, please don't let go of me. And Henry's like, it might be difficult once he kills me. And then right before Scarfield shoots Henry, Jack knocks him out with a 2x4. And we see Jack and the crew are back together. And Jack says, gentlemen, these 2 prisoners will lead us to the trident. And then we go right back over to the Dying Gull, where Jack, Gibbs, Marty, and the rest of the crew are back aboard. And, pretty much everyone's back with Jack very quickly. So, I mean, at least Gibbs is back, I just think it was so out of character that Gibbs would leave Jack. Like, I understand everyone else leaving. Maybe not Marty, but, like, Gibbs would never leave Jack. So it's good that they're all back together on the Dying Gull here. And Henry and Carina are tied to the mast. And then Gibbs is like, Captain, do you really think we can find the trident? And then Jack's like, Master Gibbs, you old worrywart, there's nothing to be concerned about at all. And he pushes the ladder down off the Dying Gull, and he's like, what could possibly go wrong, eh? And I love how Gibbs looks at him and, like, raises his eyebrow. Then Carina's like, so this was your plan? To be tortured and killed by pirates. And then Henry's like, you said you needed a ship. And Carina's like, you call this a ship? And then Jack gives the orders, like, cut the shard. And then Scrum cuts the rope, and the release mechanism begins, and all the weights holding the Dying Gull on shore begin to, detach themselves. And I love how Gibbs, he looks around, he's like, prepare to drown! And all the weights and the bars begin to topple to the ground. We also have some fantastic music in this scene as well, as the Dying Gull begins to move down the track that it's on toward the sea. So we have this really triumphant moment of the Dying Gull going into the sea. And I love how Jack's like, my dear beloved crew, finally, today is... And then there's this one last rope that's holding the Dying Gull on the track, and it stops the Dying Gull, and everyone falls over from the force of the stop. And I love how Jack gets back up, and he's like, something's going wrong? And then the rope breaks, and the Dying Gull is sent back, and I love how everyone falls back down right after they got back up. And the music is blaring in this scene as the Dying Gull makes its way into the water. And I love how everyone gets up as it makes its way into the water, and there, of course, it's still afloat, and Marty yells out, she floats! And they all cheer triumphantly as the Dying Gull successfully floats in the water. And I think that's a good place to end this episode, right before Barbossa makes a deal with Captain Salazar. So, good place to end it. I am enjoying going through this movie. As much as it seems like I'm not enjoying it, I am enjoying it. But it's important to talk about the faults of this movie, because this movie is not perfect. As much as I do enjoy this movie, there is a lot of things that are wrong with it and a lot of plot holes. So it's obviously important to talk about those things because they make no sense with, things that have already been established, in previous movies. So yeah, so next episode we'll talk more about the whole Compass Devil's Triangle thing, because we'll be talking about Jack Sparrow's backstory thing when that happens. But despite all the bad things with this movie, I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and I hope you are enjoying our adventure through Dead Men Tell No Tales / Salazar's Revenge. I am enjoying it despite everything. I do enjoy this movie a lot, as I've said multiple times, but it is not perfect. So thank you once again for listening to this episode. If you've made it all the way this far, we will continue to cover Dead Men Tell No Tales in the next episode. So I'll see you then, but thank you so much for listening. If you've left a rating or review on the podcast, whenever, like you could have done it now, you could have done it like a year ago. Thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. I'm just so happy to be talking about Pirates of the Caribbean here. This is just like a guilty pleasure thing for me. I'm getting nothing out of it but the enjoyment of just sharing Pirates of the Caribbean with people, and I think that's fantastic. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you if you've left a rating or a review. It really means a lot. So we'll pick up next episode with right where we left off in Dead Men Tell No Tales. So I will see you then. Take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram at Podcasts of the Caribbean and on Twitter at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content, trivia over there. Make sure you go check those platforms out. And be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.